Hello everybody and welcome back to the final of 3 videos looking at the Batman and Robin wave from McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse. So far I've been really pleasantly surprised by the quality of this line of figures and I've really enjoyed reviewing them and having them out on display. So today I'm going to dive straight into the final 2 figures, the Poison Ivy and the Build-A-Figure Mr. Freeze. As we've seen, the packaging for each of these figures is pretty much identical, so I'm going to dive straight in and take a look at the figure of Poison Ivy herself without looking at the packaging. And I have to say, of all the figures, Poison Ivy is probably the one that has the most detail and the best paint apps. But to start off with, let's take a look at the sculpting. And if we look at this head sculpt here, I hope you'll agree that this is actually a pretty good likeness of Uma Thurman. I think this is pretty close to screen accuracy here. I really like a lot of the details that we can see. The hairband at the top there, the leaves, particularly over the eyes, the earrings. I think they've got an awful lot right here that's really quite effective. So I think they've done a really nice job. What's also really pleasing to see in this figure are the paint apps, because usually with McFarlane Toys, if you're a long time viewer of the channel, you'll know I'm forever complaining that they don't have enough washes running through the figure, and that is definitely not the case here, because here we see an awful lot of different colours being used, multiple versions of green and yellow really being used to draw out the detail of this pretty fantastic sculpt, and it makes all the difference. This is a really fantastic looking figure and it looks really screen accurate. I particularly like that the hair actually has a number of different washes to it as well, which is really good. My one criticism would be here though that sadly the hair colour is wrong. They've obviously gone for that much more orange, that sort of ginger kind of colour, but really this should be red, because in the film this is a sort of flame red that we see here. So the colour isn't accurate in the hair, but otherwise I think they've done a really nice job giving it a lot more depth and texture, and just this costume as a whole is just really nicely done. All the different greens, the different shades of green that they've used. You can particularly see this on the legs, the gradient, which is really nice, and all these details, particularly in the central bodice and even the vines on the leg, are actually sculpted in and then painted over, which is absolutely fantastic. And to go one step further, they even got the detail of the leaves, the poison ivy on the palms of the hands, and I think this looks really good. This is really delicately painted and it's once again sculpted in, which looks brilliant. And just like the Batgirl, I'm very happy to report that she has no problems standing freely either. I was really concerned about the heel on this figure. I thought that she might have some difficulty standing up, but thankfully not at all. You can pose her as much as you like and she's going to stand pretty comfortably on her own, which is fantastic. So you don't necessarily need to use the stand that she comes with, which is a real blessing and can be a real challenge, especially with some of the daintier, smaller figures like this. Moving on, let's take a look at the articulation. Now, she does have a ball joint at the top of her neck, much like the other figures in this line, and she can move her head from side to side. Certainly the potential is there. She can also nod up and down, but of course that hair, which is a hard rubber, is always going to be a bit of a barrier here. You can move it out of the way a little bit to accommodate a bit more, but unfortunately you're not going to be able to do an awful lot with it. She does have the butterfly joint at the top of the shoulder, which is great, and it allows a lot more flexibility here. It's not as strong as some of the male characters we've seen in this line, or even the Batgirl, to be honest, but this is pretty good stuff. Now, of course, there is a ball joint there that allowing that shoulder to lift up and out. There is a double joint at the elbow, which is absolutely fantastic, and then we have this ball joint at the wrist that allows the hand to hinge up and down and rotate all around. Now, she has the same 2 points of articulation in the torso, which is absolutely brilliant, so she can move from side to side. She can lean left and right in 2 places, both the upper torso and at the waist, which allows a huge range of motion, which is absolutely brilliant, and I think they've done a fantastic job here. She's got ball joints in the hips, of course, so the legs will kick out to the side, they'll kick forwards, and they'll even go back a little bit, and then we have a double joint at the knee, allowing that lower leg to kick all the way back there, and then we have that sort of strange McFarlane Toys joint, which is kind of a swivel at the top of the ankle, but also a hinge, allowing that foot to hinge forwards and backwards, and then finally we also have some toe articulation. Sadly, with the exception of the trading card, the basic display stand, and the Build-A-Figure piece, she doesn't come with any accessories. But to be fair, I'm not going to hold that against this figure because I can't really think of what I would expect to come with this figure anyway. I think she's pretty complete as she is. So I'm actually willing to overlook that on this occasion, and I'm very happy to give this figure 4 stars because I think they've done an absolutely tremendous job with this. I really love the paint apps that we're seeing on this figure in particular. I think the sculpting's really good, the articulation's pretty fantastic, and for the most part it's really screen accurate. The reason I've removed a star here, because it was so close to getting 5, is because of that inaccuracy with the hair. I think that's difficult to overlook, and also of course it does hinder that articulation there. I'm not quite sure what you could do with this because that's always going to be a perennial problem with long-haired characters, but it's still a little bit of a challenge. But all in all, a really solid figure, another fantastic entry into a line that has been really successful. Okay, and finally we come to the Build-A-Figure, which is of course Mr. Freeze as played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now this is the figure I was probably most excited about having in the collection. I'm a huge Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, and I also really love Mr. Freeze, and whilst this may not be the best representation of the character in the world, or even the best performance from Arnold, I still have great affection for this. So yes, I was tremendously excited about picking him up, and I have to say I think they've done a really good job with the sculpt. I think this is kind of a difficult character to bring to life in the 7-inch scale, but I think they've done a really commendable job. I particularly like when we look at the head sculpt that it does have a pretty good likeness of Arnold, but also I love the approach they've taken with this translucent plastic on the headpiece. This is really, really cool, and I think it works really well. Now, one mild criticism I have with the paint apps is in the eyes, because in the film you'll notice that he wears contact lenses. They actually represent more of a point of light, that sort of like shiny, cold, luminous sort of effect in the eyes, whereas here they've painted them in and they've given him blue eyes, which looks a little bit distracting. It's not quite accurate and it's a little bit off-putting, so that's really disappointing. I'm not quite sure why they've done that, but it is a very minor criticism. Otherwise, this is a really nice sculpt and they've done a really nice job with the paint apps on the head. When it comes to the rest of the body, again, I think the sculpting is really good. It has an awful lot of detail here. It seems to be pretty much screen accurate. The proportions all look pretty solid, and I think they've captured the real essence of the costume, which is absolutely fantastic. However, I'm much less impressed with the materials they've used and the paints they've gone for. Well, let me be straight up, there's really very little in the way of paint apps here. There's no washes running over this figure, and this figure is desperately calling out for them. It's got all this great sculpting, and you really need a wash to really bring out those details. Sadly, that is not here. It's just produced in the base plastic or rubber that the figure comes in. They've opted for quite a light sort of silver grey, and I feel like this needs to be much more metallic looking and much more of a darker silver kind of grey. Now, I think this is made worse and compounded by the fact that they've opted to paint in the various blue orbs that we see across his body. Now, obviously this is much more cost effective than using a translucent plastic, but it's a real shame given that we have the translucent plastic on the headpiece and it works so well. I would have much rather they'd actually bothered to put that in the rest of the body as well, so that it was consistent, but also it would have just looked a lot more rich, would have had more depth and texture, whereas here it feels a little bit cheap and a little bit odd. So, looking at the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the top of the neck there, allowing the head to spin all the way around, and it will also lean left and right, but not as much as some of the other figures in this wave, sadly. Now, it will also nod up and down, but again, it's a little bit restricted and a bit more limited than I'd like. Now, it does have these additional shoulder pads which can be removed, and I will just remove this just to show you the full articulation, because he's got this butterfly wing joint at the top there, which is great, allowing the arms to really lift forwards and out, which is brilliant. He's got a ball joint in that socket as well, allowing the arm to lift up, and he has, interestingly, a pin swivel at the elbow rather than a double joint, so that lower forearm will spin all the way around and it will hinge to about 90 degrees. Then he's got a ball joint at the wrist, allowing that hand to rotate all the way around, and it will also hinge forwards and backwards as well. He's got another 2 ball joints in his torso, one in the upper chest, allowing him to spin from side to side, lean left and right, and another one in the waist, just like every other figure in this wave, so he can really move from side to side and lean a hell of a distance left and right, which is absolutely fantastic to see. He can also bend forwards a little bit, but he can really bend backwards, which is fantastic stuff. He does have the ball joints in the hips, the legs will kick out to the side, they'll kick forwards, and they'll go back. Now, he can bend his knee to about 90 degrees with that single joint there, but the lower leg again will swivel from side to side, mirroring what we saw in the arm. Then he's got a hinge at the ankle, allowing that foot to move forwards and backwards, but it will also pivot left and right as well. And then finally, of course, he has the toe articulation. Pleasingly, he does also come with one accessory, and that is, of course, his freeze cannon and freeze effect. Now, I think this looks really, really cool. It's very nicely sculpted. There's no paint apps on it, which is a shame, but I really do love this translucent freeze effect. I think this looks really good. And the best thing about it is that he's able to hold it really accurately, just like he does in the film. I mean, this looks like it's come straight from the film, which is absolutely fantastic. This fits very snugly into his grip and looks very natural. So I really love how they put this together and thought this through, and it really, really works very nicely. And then finally, as a quick scale comparison, you can see how he scales next to the George Clooney Batman. And as you can see, he's actually significantly taller, which is exactly how it should be. This is, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger in a freeze suit, so he's going to have to be quite a lot bigger all round than the Batman. And I was initially a little bit concerned when I got him assembled, because I thought he doesn't look that big, but when you put him next to the other figures in this wave, you can see that he genuinely towers above them, and he looks great. So that they've got this spot on. Okay, so final thoughts on Mr. Freeze. Well, I'm going to give him another 4 stars, and I have to say this was very, very close to being another 5-star figure, as so many in this wave actually could have been with just a few minor tweaks, and it's kind of frustrating that they just needed 1 or 2 little things to just push it over the top. In the case of Mr. Freeze, I think he is a fantastic figure. I love that he's a builder figure. I think he works really very, very well. I think the sculpting's great. I love his freeze ray. I love his articulation. I think most things about this figure work tremendously well. Where he loses a star for me is really the paint taps. There aren't enough paint taps on the actual body of the figure itself, and it desperately cries out for them. And I think they could have gone the extra mile and actually included those translucent blue patches for the orbs on his costume. If they'd done that, this would have been easy a 5-star figure. As it is, I've just got to pull back and give it 4, unfortunately. It's a shame because I do really, really like it. In fact, I really like all of the figures in this wave. What a tremendous collection for a film that I'm not hugely fond of, although I do have affection for them because I grew up with them at the right time. I think they've really pushed the boat out and produced a fantastic wave of figures. A lot of this is to do with the sculpting, the articulation, which is pretty top notch. I think they could have done a little bit more when it comes to accessories, but what we do have is really fun and works really well. And this is a surprisingly fantastic wave from McFarlane Toys. I would say several notches up above the norm that we see from them, and I think they've really surpassed themselves. I hope that this is the beginning of something special where we actually see the other Batman films represented like this. I would love to see a wave dedicated to Batman Returns. I think there's enough characters there to justify an entire wave. Likewise, I think they could get plenty out of Batman Forever as well. It might be a little bit more tricky with the 1989 Batman, but I would love to have a Nicholson Joker in this scale. So please, McFarlane Toys, if anyone out there is listening and has some influence, please make this happen. The only character that we're missing from this Batman and Robin wave is, of course, Bane, and in a way it's a shame that this wasn't a 5-figure set and Bane was the builder figure, but maybe they could do a follow-up wave with variants. I think they all have variant outfits in that film. Poison Ivy certainly has at least another 2 outfits that she wears. There's a red one and there's another green latex kind of costume that she wears. They could do Mr. Freeze outside of his costume. I think that would be kind of cool because he doesn't always wear it throughout the whole film, so I'd be happy to double dip on another Schwarzenegger figure, no problem. And the Batman, the Robin, the Batgirl, they all wear the silver and black costume towards the end of the film, so they could easily get some variants out of this if they really wanted, and I have to admit, if they did that, I'd be there for it. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.